The morning sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the county courthouse, staining the marble floor with golden patches. Outside, the air was tense. News vans lined the street, reporters adjusting their microphones and speaking urgently into cameras. The case they were here for had divided the small town of Brookfield for almost 2 years. Some called it justice delayed. Others said it was vengeance disguised as law. Inside the courthouse, the crowd murmured restlessly. The smell of polished wood, perfume, and nervous sweat mixed in the air. Journalists shuffled their papers, sketch artists sharpened pencils, and law students whispered about what this case might mean for future police accountability. Every eye in that room carried expectation and judgment. At the center of all the tension stood Officer Mark Dawson, a man who once wore his badge with pride and now carried it like a burden. His once neatly pressed uniform looked dull under the courtroom lights, his hands folded stiffly in front of him. Beside him sat Rex, his loyal K-9 partner, a large German shepherd with dark fur, sharp eyes, and an aura of calm discipline. Rex was the reason everyone was here. A single tragic night had turned him from a celebrated police dog into a symbol of controversy. Some said he'd saved countless lives, others said he'd taken one too many. At the back of the courtroom, almost unnoticed at first, sat Carter, a woman in her early 30s with tired eyes that had cried too long. Her fingers nervously twisted a tissue as she glanced toward the defense table. Her heart pounded painfully. Every part of her wanted to run, yet she couldn't, not today. Beside her, sitting quietly in a small blue suit that was slightly too big for him, was her 3-year-old son, Noah. The little boy's curls framed his pale face as he swung his legs slowly beneath the wooden bench. He didn't make a sound. He hadn't made a sound in 2 years. When the bailiff called the courtroom to order, the chatter stopped instantly. "All rise," he announced. The wooden benches creaked as everyone stood. Judge Owens, a woman known for her no-nonsense demeanor, entered and took her seat at the bench. "You may be seated," she said. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as everyone obeyed. The prosecutor, David Hale, stood first, a tall man with a calm but commanding presence. He represented the Carter family and the town's collective grief. "Your Honor," he began, "today we will hear the story of a family torn apart by negligence, a man who lost his life in a moment of confusion, and a child who lost his voice because of it." His throat tightened. Her trembling hand found Noah's, holding it gently. The child didn't look up. His gaze was fixed forward, not on the judge, not on the lawyers, but on the dog sitting quietly near the defense table. "Rex." His ears twitched slightly as if sensing the boy's stare, but he didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his posture noble, his dark eyes glancing between his handler and the room. A faint jingle came from his collar whenever he shifted. The courtroom lights reflected off his black and tan coat, and in that small moment Noah's fingers tightened around his mother. His breathing changed, shallow, quick, uncertain. Leaned down and whispered softly, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here." But Noah didn't respond. He hadn't spoken a single word since that night, the night the chase ended in chaos, when sirens wailed and red lights flashed across their lawn. That night, he had seen things no child should ever have to see. The sound of a bark. A man's scream. His father's body crumpling to the ground. It all lived behind Noah's eyes now, and every therapy session, every night of whispered lullabies had failed to bring his voice back. Now, in this courtroom, surrounded by strangers, that silence felt heavier than ever. Judge Owens turned to the defense. "Mister," she said, addressing Officer Dawson's attorney, "you may proceed." The defense attorney stood, buttoning his jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor. What happened 2 years ago was a tragedy, yes, but it was not a crime. Officer Dawson acted in good faith during a chaotic situation, and his partner, Rex, followed protocol. What happened was an accident, not negligence." The words fell like ice across the room. His jaw clenched. Her fingers crushed the tissue into a tight ball. An accident, she thought bitterly. You call my husband's death an accident. Her eyes lifted toward Dawson, who avoided her gaze. His expression was distant, not proud, not cold, just broken. For a fleeting second, she wondered if he was haunted too. The day stretched on. Witnesses spoke about police procedures, chase protocols, and K-9 commands. They used words like split-second decision, unintended consequence, and operational error. But none of those sterile phrases could describe what it felt like to lose a husband and watch a child lose his voice. Through it all, Noah remained motionless. Every so often he'd glance toward Rex, studying him carefully, as if trying to remember. During a break, stood and stretched her stiff legs. A few reporters tried to approach her, but the bailiff warned them back. She bent down beside Noah, brushing his curls away from his forehead. "Do you want to go home, sweetheart?" she whispered. Noah blinked, then looked past her shoulder toward Rex again. The dog was resting quietly near the officer's chair, head on his paws. The moment their eyes met, Rex's tail gave one slow wag. Froze. Noah didn't move. He just stared, not afraid, not trembling, just watching. For the first time in 2 years, something flickered across his face, a spark of curiosity, of connection. The recess ended and they returned to their seats. As the courtroom settled again, Judge Owens leaned forward slightly. "Before we resume," she said, "I've been informed that the defense intends to bring the K-9 Rex into demonstration during tomorrow's session. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," the defense replied. A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Stomach twisted. The idea of watching that dog move, obey, and respond to commands again made her heart race with fear. But when she glanced at Noah, she saw him still staring at Rex, quiet but strangely calm. As the gavel struck and the day's session ended, people began to file out. Reporters crowded the hallway, cameras flashing, pulled Noah's small hand and tried to lead him outside. But just before they reached the door, Noah stopped. He turned his head back, one last look at Rex. The dog's gaze met his, patient and steady. Felt something shift in the air, something she couldn't name. The same child who had hidden from every sound, every face, every memory for 2 years, was now standing still, watching the very creature tied to his deepest fear. Outside, autumn leaves blew across the courthouse steps, carrying whispers of gossip and grief. But inside, something subtle had begun to stir, something fragile, like a light flickering in the dark corners of memory. No one in that courtroom could have guessed what would happen next. No one knew that a child's silence would soon break, not through anger or therapy, but through a simple, unbelievable moment that would touch every heart in that room. For now, the courthouse returned to silence, but beneath that silence, destiny was already shifting. Carter sat at the edge of her bed that morning before the court hearing, the silence of the house pressing against her chest like a weight. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence that families long for. It was hollow, echoing, and filled with ghosts. The morning light came through the thin curtains, falling across a framed photograph on the dresser. Tom Carter, smiling in his firefighter uniform, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, his other hand gently holding baby Noah. She used to love that photo. Now it felt like a wound she couldn't stop touching. 2 years had passed since that night, 2 years since the police chase that changed everything. The official reports called it a misidentification in the field, a tragic case of mistaken identity. But those words couldn't erase the memory of flashing sirens, the barking of a police dog, and her husband's voice shouting her name before it was silenced forever. Tom had been responding to a small house fire on the other side of town that night. He was doing what he always did, helping people. The suspect, according to police, was fleeing on foot through the same neighborhood. Officer Mark Dawson and his K-9 partner, Rex, were dispatched to pursue. Somewhere in that chaos, in the dark, in the confusion, Rex had been ordered to take him down. But the man Rex attacked wasn't a criminal. It was Tom. would never forget the scream that tore through the night. She'd run out of their house barefoot, clutching Noah in her arms, only to see her husband lying on the pavement, his uniform torn, his eyes open but already fatting. Dawson had been shouting, trying to pull the dog back. Paramedics came, neighbors screamed, cameras flashed. And through it all, Noah, just barely 1.5 years old, had seen everything. That image had been burned into his memory like a photograph she couldn't destroy. The look of terror on her son's face as he reached for his father. The sound of the dog's growls fading into silence. The way Noah's cries had suddenly stopped, replaced by a stillness too heavy for a child so young. From that night onward, her son never spoke again. At first, doctors told her it was normal, trauma could make children quiet, distant, withdrawn. "He'll talk again soon," they promised. But weeks turned into months, and Noah's silence grew into a wall. He stopped reacting to his name. He avoided eye contact. The little boy who used to giggle whenever Tom swung him into the air now stared blankly at the floor. Had tried everything: therapy, specialists, child psychologists. They all gave her careful, clinical words like selective mutism and post-traumatic stress response. But none of their explanations comforted her. None of them told her how to get her son back. Each night she'd sit by his bed, reading storybooks aloud, pretending he could hear her, pretending that one day he might answer again. And now, here she was sitting in a courtroom with the very man and dog who had shattered her world. When the trial began, hadn't wanted to attend. Her attorney insisted that her presence would make a difference, that showing the jury the family's pain might help them understand what had been lost, but wasn't here for the jury. She was here for herself, for Noah. She needed to see the man who had taken everything. She needed to see if he carried guilt in his eyes, or if he had learned to live with it. That morning in the courthouse, she noticed every small detail. The way Dawson's hands trembled slightly when he sat down. The way Rex sat by his side, alert yet calm, like he didn't understand the hatred directed toward him. It was strange. She couldn't bring herself to hate the dog. She tried, but deep down, she knew he was only doing what he'd been trained to do. The real weight of her anger sat squarely on the man who gave the order. Yet as she watched Dawson, she saw something she hadn't expected: shame. Real, raw shame. His eyes didn't carry defiance or pride. They carried sorrow. Every time he glanced toward her, his face tightened, as if each second of this trial was a punishment he fully believed he deserved. During recess, found herself outside on the courthouse steps, clutching her coffee cup as if it might stop her hands from shaking. Reporters gathered nearby, whispering, pointing cameras in her direction. She ignored them. Her gaze drifted toward the playground across the street. Children laughed, their sneakers pounding against the slide and swings. She remembered when Noah used to sound like that, his laughter so full of life it could fill the house. Now, she'd give anything just to hear a single word from him. "Mrs. Carter," a soft voice interrupted. She turned. It was Lydia, one of the court-appointed counselors who'd been working with Noah for months. Lydia's kind eyes and gentle tone had been a small comfort during the worst of it. "How's he holding up?" Lydia asked quietly, glancing at the boy who stood beside, staring at the ground, his small fingers clutching a toy car. Sighed, "He's quiet, watching everything like always." Lydia crouched to Noah's level, offering a smile. "Hey there, buddy, you hanging in?" Noah didn't respond. He just looked past her, his gaze fixed somewhere distant across the street, toward the courthouse window where, just visible through the glass, Rex sat beside his handler. Lydia followed his line of sight, then slowly stood. "He's remembering," she said softly. "Something stirring. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes, revisiting the memory is how healing starts." Wanted to believe that. She really did. But every time she looked into Noah's big blue eyes, she saw Tom's reflection and the unbearable truth that their family would never be whole again. Back inside, the trial resumed. The prosecution presented photos, the scene of the accident, the emergency response timeline, the testimony of paramedics. Each image hit like a blow. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Every photo was another piece of the night she relived every time she closed her eyes. At one point, Dawson's attorney requested that Rex remain in the courtroom for the remainder of the proceedings, arguing that the dog's presence was essential to understanding the events of that night. The judge reluctantly agreed. As Rex re-entered the room, felt Noah stiffen beside her. His little hand tightened around hers. She whispered gently, "It's okay, Mommy's here." But then something strange happened. Instead of shrinking back, Noah looked up. His wide eyes locked on the dog walking down the aisle. For a moment, the child didn't seem afraid at all, just curious. Rex glanced his way, pausing mid-step. His ears perked slightly, his expression almost human in its stillness. The two stared at each other across the courtroom, one silent, one voiceless in his own way. It was a moment so quiet that even the judge stopped flipping her notes. Held her breath. Then the bailiff cleared his throat and motioned for Dawson to sit. The spell broke. Rex lay obediently at his handler's feet, but his head turned slightly toward Noah once more, as if acknowledging him. The rest of the day passed in slow, exhausting waves of testimony and tension. By the time the court adjourned, felt hollowed out. She gathered her papers, helped Noah down from the bench, and started toward the exit. But as they reached the door, she noticed her son glance back again. His eyes lingered on the dog, calm, steady, familiar. Something flickered behind that silence, something hadn't seen in 2 long years. It wasn't fear this time. It was recognition. She squeezed his hand. "Let's go home, sweetheart." Noah didn't answer, but he looked up at her and blinked slowly, a small gesture. But for it felt like the faintest sign of life returning. She didn't know it yet, but that simple look would be the beginning of something extraordinary, the start of a healing she never thought possible. The next morning, the courtroom felt colder than usual, not because of the temperature, but because of the atmosphere that settled like fog over the room. Everyone knew this was the day the defense would bring in the K-9 demonstration. The tension hummed in the air. Even the reporters, usually loud and eager, spoke in hushed tones. Arrived early, holding Noah's hand as they climbed the courthouse steps. The boy's small shoes clicked softly against the polished floor, echoing faintly down the hall. He clutched a worn stuffed bear in his free hand, a gift from his father long ago, the last thing that seemed to bring him comfort. Felt her heart race faster with every step. She spent the night tossing and turning, haunted by the thought of seeing that dog again, the dog whose name still made her chest tighten. She had seen him before in photos, on the news, and now again in court, but the thought of seeing him move, hearing his bark, brought back flashes of that horrible night like jagged pieces of glass cutting through her memory. When they entered the courtroom, Officer Mark Dawson was already there, sitting stiffly beside Rex. The dog's dark fur gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his ears alert, his brown eyes calm but focused. He was a magnificent animal, broad-chested, disciplined, perfectly still. If you didn't know the story, you'd think he was a symbol of pride. But knew better. She took a seat in the same spot as before, the back bench near the exit, just in case she needed to leave quickly. Noah climbed up beside her, setting his stuffed bear on his lap. The courtroom buzzed quietly until Judge Owens entered. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood, then sat again. The judge's gaze swept the room, lingering for a moment on the child seated behind the prosecution's table. Could feel the sympathy in that look, though it brought her no comfort. "Proceed," Judge Owens said. The defense attorney, Mr. stood. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to proceed with the K-9 behavior demonstration to provide clarity regarding the dog's actions on the night of the incident." The judge nodded reluctantly. "Proceed, but keep it brief." Turned to the court. "Ladies, and what you're about to see is a demonstration of standard police K-9 obedience. The purpose is to show that Rex acts only under command, not out of aggression or independent judgment. Stomach twisted, her hands trembled as Dawson gave a short whistle. Rex rose instantly, every muscle in his body taut, focused. The sudden movement made her flinch. She felt Noah's small hand clutch her arm tightly. "It's okay, baby," she whispered shakily. "Mommy's here." But her words were more for herself than for him. Dawson began giving commands: sit, stay, heel, and each time Rex obeyed perfectly. His movements were precise, controlled, professional. The courtroom watched in awe. Even the judge's eyes softened slightly. "Rex," Dawson said finally, voice low and steady, "search." The dog sniffed around a small box placed by the bailiff, then barked once, signaling he'd found the hidden item. The room erupted with quiet murmurs. Some of the jurors smiled faintly, impressed by the animal's intelligence. But couldn't smile. She stared at Rex, her chest tightening. Every bark sent a shiver through her. And then she noticed Noah. Her son wasn't afraid. He wasn't hiding or trembling. He was watching. His blue eyes followed the dog's every move with startling focus. His head tilted slightly as Rex walked across the floor. It was as though he recognized something, a memory, a sound, a scent, something only he could feel. When Rex returned to Dawson's side and sat, the dog suddenly looked toward the back of the courtroom. Directly at Noah. The air seemed to thicken. Noah didn't blink. His hand loosened on sleeve, his little fingers falling away. The world around him seemed to disappear. No judge, no lawyers, no audience, just him and the dog staring across the courtroom. The silence stretched on for seconds that felt like hours. Then Rex's tail moved, one slow, cautious wag. The sound was barely audible, a soft thump against the floor, but it made breath catch in her throat. The last time she'd seen that tail move, it had been over her husband's lifeless body. Her vision blurred as tears welled in her eyes. But Noah didn't cry. He leaned forward slightly, his small lips parting, not to speak, not yet, but as if he was trying to form words he couldn't remember how to say. Placed her hand gently on his shoulder, her voice trembling. "Noah, sweetie, it's okay. Look at Mommy." He didn't. His eyes remained locked on Rex. And Rex did not look away. The courtroom had gone silent. Even the defense attorney stopped mid-sentence. People could feel the weight of the moment but couldn't understand it. Dawson noticed it too. He looked from his dog to the child, his expression shifting from confusion to quiet realization. For a brief moment, he saw not a witness or a victim, but a memory. That little boy, standing on a front lawn in his pajamas 2 years ago, clutching a teddy bear as his father fell. Dawson swallowed hard, his voice faltering as he spoke the next command. "Rex, down." The dog obeyed instantly, lowering himself to the ground. But his gaze never left Noah. His hands shook. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Something was happening, something she couldn't name but could feel deep in her bones. Her son's lips moved again, not quite forming words but shapes of recognition. The child's eyes softened, the fear melting away into something new, understanding. The judge finally cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "Mister, I believe the point of your demonstration has been made." Nodded quickly, signaling Dawson to step back. The officer gave a quiet command and Rex returned to his side, lying down beside his chair. The noise of the courtroom slowly returned, papers shuffling, chairs creaking, quiet whispers, but barely heard any of it. She was too busy staring at her son. Noah was still watching Rex, his tiny fingers gripping the edge of the bench. His breathing was steady now, his body calm. For the first time in 2 years, didn't see terror in his face, only curiosity. When the session ended for the day, she gathered her bag, still shaken. The hallway outside was crowded with people and cameras. Reporters called her name, but she ignored them. They stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. Leaves danced across the courthouse steps, the orange and brown colors swirling like fire. Took a deep breath, trying to ground herself. Then she looked down at Noah. He was staring straight ahead, not at the crowd, not at the reporters, but back through the courthouse doors, where Rex had just been led out. His blue eyes shimmered in the afternoon light, wide and thoughtful. Knelt beside him. "You okay, baby?" she whispered. For a heartbeat, she thought he might say something. His mouth twitched, as if forming the first syllable of a word. But then he stopped, turned his gaze back to her, and simply nodded. It was a small gesture, a tiny, fragile sign, but to it meant everything. For the first time in 2 years, her son had looked at something connected to that night and not broken down. He had faced it and survived. She didn't know what it meant yet. She didn't know if it was progress or something deeper. But she knew one thing. That moment in the courtroom, that silent stare between a boy and a dog, had shifted something. Something invisible had cracked open. A door between the past and the present, between pain and healing. Took his hand gently, whispering, "Let's go home, sweetheart." Noah didn't answer, but as they walked away, he glanced back one last time, a quiet, knowing look. Somewhere inside him, buried under the silence and the trauma, something had begun to wake. And that awakening would soon change everything. The days that followed the courtroom demonstration were strangely quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that hums with things left unsaid. Noticed it first in the way Noah stared out of the car window on their drive home that day. He didn't hum his favorite tune. He didn't tap his toy car against the glass. He simply stared, as if his mind was searching through a fog for something familiar. That night, after tucking him into bed, she lingered at the doorway, watching him. His small face rested against the pillow, his fingers clutching the worn ear of his stuffed bear. The moonlight painted faint silver lines across his room, the same room she'd redecorated a year ago to erase reminders of what happened. But memories, she'd learned, weren't so easily painted over. She sighed softly, turning off the light and heading to the living room. The silence of the apartment pressed around her. She poured herself a glass of water and sat on the couch, staring at the framed photograph on the wall, her husband, Officer Daniel Hayes, smiling in his uniform, his arm around her shoulders, his other hand resting on a young Rex, the same dog that now stood at the center of the trial. The memory stabbed like glass. That photograph had been taken 2 weeks before everything fell apart. 2 weeks before the night when her husband's call for backup never came. 2 weeks before the headlines, Officer Hayes killed during botched operation. Pressed a trembling hand to her lips. It still felt unreal. 2 years had passed and the questions still burned like fire. Why had Rex attacked? What had Daniel seen that night? And why did the department's report feel so incomplete? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound. A small, muffled voice. At first she thought she imagined it, but then she heard it again, faint and broken, coming from Noah's room. Heart racing, she rushed down the hallway and pushed open the door. "Noah," she whispered, her voice tight. He was sitting upright in bed, eyes open but unfocused. His little body trembled. His lips moved, mumbling something too soft to catch. Hurried to his side. "Baby, what is it? Did you have a bad dream?" He blinked, his breathing shallow. Then, barely audible, 2 words slipped from his mouth, the same 2 he had muttered in court, only now they carried shape, memory, and fear. "Bad man." Froze. Her pulse hammered in her ears. "What did you say?" she whispered, leaning closer. Noah's small hand lifted weakly, pointing toward the corner of the room, toward the window. His voice quivered. "Bad man, Daddy." And then he began to cry. Gathered him into her arms, holding him tightly, tears spilling down her own cheeks. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in almost 2 years, not since that night. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're safe, Mommy's here." But inside she was trembling. The phrase replayed in her head again and again. Bad man, Daddy. It wasn't random. It was a memory trying to surface, something buried so deep inside her son's fragile mind that it had only now begun to claw its way out. When Noah finally drifted back to sleep, sat beside his bed, staring into the dark. The shadows outside the window stretched long and thin. Every creak of the floor made her heart jolt. The next morning, she called Detective Harper, the lead investigator who had stayed in touch even after the case had gone cold. Harper was an older man with weary eyes, someone who had seen too many broken families and too many questions without answers. He answered on the second ring, "Everything all right?" She hesitated. "No, something happening with Noah. He said something last night." "What did he say?" "Bad man." Then he said, "Daddy." He pointed toward the window. "It's the first time he's mentioned that night." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that meant Harper was thinking hard. "You said he pointed to the window." "Yes." Harper exhaled slowly. "That's interesting. The initial report said the intruder came in through the front door, but Rex's positioning that night always suggested otherwise." Frowned. "You mean Rex wasn't attacking Daniel?" "That's what's been bothering me for 2 years, Harper said. The K9 footage was corrupted, but based on the angles of the wounds and Rex's training logs, the dog might have been trying to protect your husband, not attack him." Felt her stomach drop. "You think someone else was there?" "I think there's a chance your husband saw something he wasn't supposed to," Harper said gravely. "And your son, he might be the only one who remembers what really happened." The room seemed to spin. For a long moment she said nothing. Then quietly she asked, "What do I do?" "Bring him in again," Harper said. "Not for questioning, for observation. Let's see if being around Rex again triggers more memories. But be careful, the past doesn't stay buried without a reason." When she hung up, her hands were shaking. She looked toward Noah's room. He was sitting on the floor, quietly drawing with his crayons. She approached softly, heart heavy with both hope and dread. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, after a moment, he held up the paper. It was a crude drawing, a stick figure of a man, a smaller figure beside him, and a large dog between them. Above the dog he had scribbled something dark, like a shadow. Felt her breath catch. "Who's that, baby?" Noah's voice was barely a whisper. "Bad man." Her knees went weak. She knelt beside him, trying to steady her voice. "Do you remember what happened that night?" He didn't reply. Instead, he picked up a black crayon and drew a small square beside the man, a window. Then he looked at her, his eyes wide, frightened but clear. "Dog barked," he said softly. "Daddy fell." Tears blurred her vision. She hugged him tightly, her heart breaking all over again, not only from the pain of remembering, but from the realization that her son's silence had been protecting him all along. Later that night, long after Noah had fallen asleep, sat at her kitchen table with Harper's old case files spread before her. Newspaper clippings, photos, reports, everything she tried to forget. She flipped through until she found the police evidence log, the one that listed all items recovered from the scene. Her eyes froze on one line. Item 47, unidentified shoe print found beneath the living room window, size 11, not matching Officer Hayes or K9 handler footwear. His fingers went cold. She whispered to herself, "The window." The sound of Noah's voice from earlier echoed in her head, "Bad man, Daddy." The puzzle pieces were aligning, and the picture that was forming made her blood run cold. For 2 years she'd believed Rex had attacked her husband. But what if the truth was far darker? What if the dog had tried to stop the real killer, and her husband had died protecting them both? Stared down at the photograph of Daniel and Rex again. For the first time she didn't see tragedy. She saw warning, loyalty, and unfinished truth. Something inside her shifted. The fear that had haunted her was replaced by something stronger, resolve. If her son had started to remember, then maybe justice wasn't as far away as everyone believed. She stood, walked to Noah's room, and gently brushed a strand of hair from his forehead as he slept. "Hold on, baby," she whispered. "We're going to find out what really happened, I promise." Outside, the wind howled softly against the window pane, the same one Noah had pointed to. And for the first time in 2 years, didn't close the curtains. She let the moonlight spill in. Because now she knew the night wasn't over. It was only just beginning to speak. 2 days later, the rain came down hard over the city, relentless and gray, drumming against the courthouse windows like a steady heartbeat. Inside, the tension was thicker than ever. Stood near the entrance, her fingers twisting the edge of her jacket. She had hardly slept since that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Noah's drawing, the dark shadow outside the window, the words "bad man" etched into her thoughts. Detective Harper met her at the courthouse steps, holding a thin folder under his arm. His salt and pepper hair was slicked by the rain, and his eyes were sharper than she'd ever seen them. "You found something?" she asked, her voice low but trembling with hope. "I think so," Harper said. "I went back to the original files, cross-checked the evidence they logged that night. There were 2 sets of prints outside your house. One was Daniel. The other," he opened the folder, showing her a photograph, "was." His breath caught. The photo showed a partial footprint in the mud, just beneath the window where Noah had pointed. "I sent it to forensics for reanalysis," Harper continued, "and it came back as a match to an officer who was at the scene that night." She frowned. "What do you mean, one of the responding officers?" Harper hesitated, lowering his voice. "Mark Dawson." The name hit her like a thunderclap. Rex's handler. He nodded grimly. He claimed he was stationed outside the perimeter when it happened, but if this print matches his boot size, he was closer, much closer. And Rex's behavior since then makes sense. The dog might have been confused, torn between his handler and his duty. Felt her knees weaken. "You're saying Dawson might have been involved?" Harper sighed. "I can't prove anything yet, but there's a possibility your husband found out something he shouldn't have, something inside the department. That's why Dawson's testimony feels so rehearsed. It's why he's pushing to clear Rex's record so badly. If Rex's attack is ruled a mistake, nobody will question the scene again." Stared out the rain-blurred window. Pieces of the puzzle she'd buried long ago were suddenly fitting together. The late-night calls Daniel used to take in whispers, his sleepless eyes the week before the shooting, his last words to her, "If anything happens to me, trust Rex." She dismissed it then, thinking he meant it as reassurance. Now it felt like a warning. Before she could respond, the bailiff appeared. "Mrs. Hayes, Detective Harper, the judge is ready." They entered the courtroom. The air inside buzzed with quiet energy, the kind that comes before a storm. Reporters filled the back rows again, cameras poised, pens scratching notes. At the defense table sat Mark Dawson, straight-backed and expressionless, with Rex lying obediently at his feet. The dog's ears twitched slightly when walked in, but his eyes didn't move. The judge called the session to order. "We will now resume proceedings in the matter of Officer Rex, the K-9 unit involved in the Hayes incident." The defense attorney stood. "Your Honor, today we intend to prove beyond doubt that Rex acted purely under training protocol and could not have attacked without command. Officer Dawson will testify further to his control during that operation." Stomach churned. She watched Dawson take the stand, his face calm, too calm. Approached him. "Officer Dawson, can you describe your actions on the night in question?" Dawson nodded. "I was stationed outside near the west side of the property. I released Rex upon hearing gunfire. When I entered, I found Officer Hayes down. Rex was standing near him, responding to my command to stand down." "Did Rex appear aggressive toward you or others at that moment?" "No, sir. He was calm, awaiting orders as trained. Smiled faintly. "Thank you, officer, no further questions." The prosecutor rose. "Officer Dawson, do you recall where you entered the property from?" "The front door," Dawson said. "And you're certain about that?" "Yes, sir." The prosecutor glanced at Harper, who was seated behind. Harper gave a small nod, their silent cue. The prosecutor turned back to Dawson. "Then how do you explain this?" He handed a printed photograph to the clerk, who placed it before the witness. "This is a boot print found outside the living room window beneath where Mrs. Hayes' son later pointed. Forensics confirmed it matches your issued footwear." The courtroom gasped. Dawson's jaw tightened. "That's impossible," he muttered. The prosecutor stepped closer. "Is it? Because that print was found on the inside edge of the garden bed, meaning whoever left it was directly under the window before entry. Are you claiming that's not your boot?" "I told you, I entered through the front." "But the print says otherwise," the prosecutor interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "And the boy's statement, 'Bad man, window daddy,' lines up perfectly with this location." Dawson's composure cracked. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Dawson, please answer clearly. Were you or were you not near that window before the incident?" For a long, tense moment, he said nothing. Then, before anyone could speak again, a sharp bark echoed through the courtroom. "Rex!" The dog had risen, eyes locked on Dawson, fur bristling. The room froze. "Rex, heel!" Dawson barked. But Rex didn't move. His teeth bared slightly, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. The sound wasn't aggressive, it was protective, focused, instinctive. Everyone watched in stunned silence. Felt her heart race as memories flooded back Daniel's voice, the sound of barking, the shattering glass. She stood, trembling, as Noah, seated beside her, slowly rose too. His small hand lifted and pointed straight at Dawson. "Bad man," he said softly, his voice clear and steady this time. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Cameras clicked wildly. Dawson turned pale. His lips parted, but no words came out. "Mr. Dawson," the judge said sharply, "control your animal." But Rex ignored him. He took one cautious step forward, his eyes unwavering. Then, without a command, he sat down, facing the witness stand, directly between Dawson and the prosecutor. Harper stood suddenly. "Your Honor, may I approach?" The judge nodded. Harper stepped forward, placing a photo on the prosecution table. This image was taken from the traffic camera a block from the Hayes residence that night. It shows Officer Dawson's vehicle arriving 5 minutes before his call-in time, meaning he was already there before backup was requested. The courtroom erupted in whispers. His voice faltered. "Objection, this is speculation." "Overruled," said the judge, her tone heavy with suspicion. Dawson's shoulders slumped. His eyes darted to the dog still watching him, unblinking. In that moment the truth hung thick in the air, a truth too heavy to hide. Rex hadn't betrayed his handler that night. He tried to stop him. His eyes filled with tears as realization sank in. Her husband had trusted Rex, and Rex had tried to protect him, not harm him. Noah's small voice broke the silence once more. "Dog good," he whispered. The judge exhaled deeply. "We will take a recess," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Officer Dawson, you are to remain in custody until further review." As the gavel struck, chaos erupted, reporters shouting, people whispering, cameras flashing, but barely heard any of it. She dropped to her knees beside Noah, wrapping her arms around him tightly. Rex, still calm but watchful, lowered his head slightly, as if acknowledging them both. For the first time in 2 years, the fog around the truth was beginning to lift. And in that moment, amid the storm of noise and revelation, whispered softly to her son, "You did it, sweetheart. You remembered." Noah smiled faintly, resting his head on her shoulder. "Dog's safe," he murmured, eyes half closing. She looked up at Rex, the dog once accused, now standing as proof of her husband's loyalty and courage. For the first time since that night, believed that justice might finally come. But what she didn't know yet was that the storm was far from over, because the truth about Dawson's motive, and what Daniel had discovered before his death, was about to explode in ways no one in that courtroom could have imagined. The courthouse emptied slowly, its marble halls echoing with the sounds of hurried footsteps and whispered disbelief. Reporters swarmed like bees outside the doors, their voices overlapping, all shouting the same question. Did the K-9 expose a cover-up? Inside, away from the noise, sat on a bench in the corridor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Noah rested against her side, half asleep, his thumb still tucked against the soft ear of his stuffed bear. He'd been brave, far braver than she ever imagined. But the truth he'd spoken, the 2 words that had broken open years of silence, had changed everything. Across from her, Detective Harper stood near a vending machine, phone pressed to his ear, his jaw set. "Yes, I want the precinct records pulled from the week of the Hayes operation. Every log, every report, especially anything involving Officer Dawson or his unit," he said. "And check the evidence vault. I want confirmation that all files were signed back in." He hung up, turned toward and sighed. "It's worse than I thought." Frowned. How much worse could it get? Harper rubbed a hand over his face. The internal affairs team just confirmed the night Daniel died, there were 2 concurrent operations listed in the system. One official, one marked as off-grid. Guess who signed off on both? Her stomach sank. Dawson. Exactly. He filed a false report to make it seem like Rex went rogue. But now that your son's memory lines up with the evidence, the department's going to have to dig deeper. And if Dawson's hiding something, others might be too. Swallowed hard. You think Daniel found out about it? Harper nodded slowly. Daniel was one of the clean ones. If he stumbled onto something, smuggling, dirty money, take your pick, that could made him a target. And Dawson had the training, the access, and the perfect scapegoat, the dog. Looked away, tears stinging her eyes. He used Rex to cover his tracks. Harper's expression softened. And your husband died trying to stop him. The words hit like a blade. For 2 years she had lived under a shadow of shame and confusion, believing her husband had been the victim of an accident. Now, the fog was lifting, revealing not tragedy but betrayal. Noah stirred beside her, his small voice breaking through the heavy silence. "Mommy." She stroked his hair gently. "Yes, baby." He blinked sleepily, then whispered, "Dog help Daddy." His throat tightened. She kissed his forehead, whispering, "Yes, sweetheart, he did." Harper checked his watch. "I need to get to the station before they start shredding paperwork. You should head home, keep the boy safe. If Dawson talks, we'll know more soon." She nodded, clutching Noah's hand as they stood. But before Harper could leave, a young officer jogged up the hallway, breathless. "Detective Harper," the officer said urgently, "Dawson's missing." Harper spun around. "What do you mean, missing?" They were supposed to transfer him to holding after recess, but he never made it downstairs. Cameras cut out in the stairwell. By the time we got them back online, he was gone. So was his service weapon. His blood ran cold. "You mean he's escaped?" The officer nodded grimly. Harper cursed under his breath. "Get an APB out now. If he's desperate, he's dangerous." His instinct screamed. "He'll come after us. He knows Noah can expose him." Harper's eyes darkened. "You're right. We need to get you both somewhere safe." He led them quickly through the back of the courthouse, avoiding the reporters clustered at the main entrance. Outside, the rain had turned into a steady drizzle, the city lights blurring into streaks of orange and blue. Harper ushered them into his unmarked car. "Where are we going?" asked, holding Noah close. "My place first," Harper said. "Then we'll move you to protective custody. I don't trust anyone at the precinct until we know who else was involved." The drive through the rain felt endless. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm, the city passing by in watery blurs. Kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting headlights to follow. Noah sat quietly in the back seat, eyes wide, watching the raindrops race down the glass. He didn't say a word, but every time thunder rumbled, he gripped his bear. Finally, they pulled into a narrow alley behind an old brick building, Harper's, a second-floor apartment used for surveillance operations. "Stay here," Harper said, stepping out first, checking the shadows. When he gave the signal, hurried out with Noah. Inside, the apartment was small but warm, filled with old case files and the smell of burnt coffee. Harper locked the door, double-checking the window latches. "You're safe here," he said. "No one knows this place exists." But even as he said it, his eyes flicked toward the window, scanning the rain-soaked street below. Settled Noah on the couch, wrapping him in a blanket. The boy's eyes fluttered shut almost instantly, exhaustion winning over fear. She turned to Harper. "What if Dawson's not working alone?" He hesitated before answering. "Then he's got help from someone with access, maybe higher up. That would explain the missing footage, the altered reports, the cover stories. Daniel must have found a thread and pulled too hard." She exhaled shakily, "And now Dawson's trying to cut it off." Before Harper could respond, a faint sound echoed from outside, a car door slamming. Harper's head snapped toward the window. He drew his weapon silently, motioning for to stay back. The rain made it hard to see clearly, but through the streaked glass, the faint glow of headlights cut across the alley. A black sedan, no police markings, engine idling. Harper cursed under his breath. "He found us." His pulse raced. "What do we do?" He turned to her, voice low and urgent. "Take Noah and stay behind the desk. Don't make a sound. If I say run, you run, understood?" She nodded, trembling. Harper crept toward the door, his movements practiced and steady. The rain drowned out the sound of his steps. Then, without warning, the front door shuddered violently, one hard kick, then another. "Harper," a voice shouted from outside, Dawson's voice. "You think you can hide her from me?" Harper raised his gun. "You're done, Dawson. Put the weapon down and step away." A harsh laugh echoed through the hall. "You think you know what this is about. You don't know anything." Another crash, the doorframe splintered. Harper fired a warning shot. Clutched Noah tightly behind the desk, whispering prayers under her breath. Then through the chaos, Rex's bark shattered the silence. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it, but when she peered out from behind the desk, her heart stopped. Rex was there, soaked, panting and untethered, standing in the doorway beside Harper. His fur dripped rainwater, but his eyes burned with focus. "Good boy," Harper whispered. "You followed him here, didn't you?" Rex growled low, his gaze fixed on the shadows outside. A gunshot cracked through the air, the sound deafening. Screamed, covering Noah's ears. Harper ducked for cover, returning fire. Then silence. For a long moment, all that could be heard was the rain. When Harper finally stepped toward the doorway, gun raised, he saw Dawson lying on the wet pavement, bleeding but alive. His weapon kicked several feet away. Rex stood beside him, muzzle stained, chest heaving. Harper lowered his weapon slowly. "You should surrendered, Mark." Dawson coughed, his voice weak but defiant. "You don't get it, do you? Daniel wasn't supposed to find out. The money, the shipments, it was bigger than me." His voice trembled from behind Harper. "What shipments?" Dawson turned his head toward her, eyes full of regret. "Ask your husband's files. He found the storage units. He was going to blow the whistle. I didn't mean for the kid to see." Tears blurred his vision. "You killed him to protect a lie." Dawson didn't answer. His eyes closed as paramedics rushed in. Harper holstered his gun, his expression heavy. "It's over," he said quietly. Knelt beside Rex, stroking his soaked fur. The dog looked up at her, tail wagging faintly. "No," she whispered. "It's not over. Not until everyone who covered this up answers for it. Harper nodded. Then we keep going together. Outside, the rain began to fade, replaced by the distant sound of approaching sirens. And as they carried Noah to safety, looked back one last time, at the loyal dog who had never stopped fighting for the truth. Rex had spoken in the only way he could, through instinct, through loyalty, through courage. And now, finally, people were listening. Morning light crept through the blinds of the, spilling across the floor in thin, golden lines. The storm had passed, leaving behind a heavy stillness, the kind that followed nights of chaos and revelation. Stood at the window, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. Her reflection in the glass looked older somehow, tired but stronger. In the other room, she could hear Noah humming softly as he played with Rex, the sound of tiny giggles mixing with the dog's gentle huffs. It was almost peaceful, almost. Behind her, Detective Harper sat at the table surrounded by papers, files, photos, transcripts, and a dozen marked-up documents that had arrived overnight from Internal Affairs. His phone buzzed every few minutes, each message a new thread in the tangled web they were trying to untie. "They found Dawson's safe house," he said finally, not looking up. Turned, "What did they find?" Harper exhaled deeply, flipping through the file. Cash, fake IDs, and a ledger lists of payments and drop locations. Looks like he was part of something much bigger, smuggling weapons through police evidence lockers. Someone inside was clearing the path for it. The same operation Daniel must stumbled onto. His heart clenched, and they tried to bury it by killing him. "Exactly," Harper said. "Dawson was just one cog in a dirty machine. But now that he's in custody, others are panicking. 2 officers didn't report for duty this morning. One's already tried to skip town." She set her coffee down, the cup trembling slightly in her hand. "Will they face justice?" "They will," Harper said, "but it won't be easy. Corruption like this, it runs deep. The kind that hides behind medals and uniforms." For a moment, silence filled the room, the kind that carried weight. Then, from the living room, Noah's voice piped up cheerfully. "Mommy, Rex wants breakfast." Smiled despite the heaviness. She walked over, kneeling beside her son. "Does he now?" Rex wagged his tail, looking up at her expectantly, his golden eyes full of intelligence. He'd been through so much, abandoned, accused, hunted, yet still he stayed loyal. As she poured food into Rex's bowl, she whispered softly, "Thank you, boy. You never stopped fighting for Daniel." The dog tilted his head, as if understanding. That afternoon, Harper received a call that changed everything. He answered quickly, "Harper." "Detective," said a voice from Internal Affairs. "We've analyzed the ledger. There's a name at the top of every transaction, Chief Roland Beckett." Harper froze. "The chief?" "Yes, looks like he's the one pulling the strings. Dawson was his enforcer." Harper's grip tightened on the phone. "He's scheduled for a press conference in an hour to discuss the case. He's going to try to spin it." The voice on the other end sighed, "Unless someone stops him." Harper hung up and turned to, "It's Beckett. He's behind it all. The smuggling, the false reports, Daniel's death, everything. And now he's about to go on live TV to cover it up." His eyes flashed with determination. "Then let's not let him." Harper hesitated. "Going public means danger. Beckett has influence, media, politics, police. He'll do anything to silence you." She looked toward Noah, then back at him. "He already took my husband. He's not taking our truth." Within the hour, they were on their way to City Hall. Harper drove while sat in the back with Noah and Rex. The air felt electric, the kind that hummed before something big. As they arrived, cameras were already flashing. Reporters crowded the steps, microphones pointed toward the podium where Chief Beckett stood, tall, polished, his gray hair gleaming under the morning sun. He spoke with calm authority, his voice carrying over the hum of the crowd. "The department mourns the loss of Officer Daniel Hayes," he said smoothly. However, recent accusations are baseless and harmful to our city's trust. The alleged corruption is an isolated case, and lies. The voice cut through the air like a blade, heads turned. Stepped forward, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Harper followed close behind, holding a folder thick with evidence. Cameras swiveled toward them, reporters shouting questions. Beckett's smile faltered. "Mrs. Hayes, this isn't the place." "No," she interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "This is exactly the place. You killed my husband's name with your lies. You let good men die to protect your deals." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Beckett stiffened, glancing toward his aides. Continued, her eyes blazing. "My husband discovered your smuggling routes. He tried to report it, and when he did, you sent Dawson after him. You made it look like an accident, then blamed an innocent dog." Beckett raised a hand, forcing a smile. "Mrs. Hayes' grief can cloud." But Harper stepped forward, slamming the folder onto the podium. "These are signed transactions from your own accounts, Chief. Payments to Dawson, transfers to offshore banks, evidence reports, all traced back to your office." The crowd erupted. Reporters surged forward, shouting over each other. Beckett's face went pale. "That's impossible," he stammered. Met his gaze. "No, it's justice." Before he could respond, uniformed officers pushed through the crowd. Internal affairs. The lead agent stepped forward. "Chief Roland Beckett, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and the murder of Officer Daniel Hayes." Beckett tried to speak, but his words were drowned out by the flash of cameras and the roar of reporters. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, felt a weight lift off her chest, years of doubt and pain finally beginning to ease. Harper looked at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You did it." She shook her head, glancing down at Noah and Rex. "We did." Noah tugged at her sleeve, pointing at the dog. "Mommy, Rex, good boy." Tears welled in her eyes. She knelt and hugged them both tightly. "The best boy," she whispered. The following days were a blur: headlines, interviews, investigations. The story exploded across national news. Widow and police dog expose corruption ring. Public outcry was immediate. Officers who had once stayed silent began to come forward. Files long buried were reopened. For the first time, the city began to heal. Rex was officially reinstated, not as a tool of the department but as a hero. During a special ceremony, Harper pinned a new medal on his collar as the press looked on. Noah clapped happily, beaming with pride. Stood beside them, her heart full. When the ceremony ended, Harper turned to her. "You know, Daniel would be proud of you, of both of you." She smiled softly. "I think he's watching." As the sun dipped behind the courthouse, looked down at Rex, who sat obediently beside Noah. "You ready to go home, boy?" she asked. Rex wagged his tail, barking once sharp, certain, full of life. For the first time in years, felt peace. The ghosts had spoken, the lies had fallen, and the truth, however painful, had finally won. But she knew one thing for certain. This was not just Daniel's story anymore. It was Noah's, it was Rex, it was hers. A story of loyalty that couldn't be silenced. A story of justice that refused to die. A story that began with 2 words and ended with the truth. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. News channels ran endless segments on the Hayes case. The public demanded accountability, and the department faced the harsh light of transparency for the first time in decades. Chief Beckett's arrest had shaken the foundation of the entire police force, and the ripple effects were impossible to ignore. Noah and Rex had returned home under protective custody, but the sense of danger had faded now, replaced by cautious relief. The small apartment, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now buzzed with life. Noah laughed as he chased Rex through the living room, tossing a soft ball across the floor, the dog bounding after it with joy and energy that seemed almost miraculous after all they had endured. Watched from the kitchen, sipping coffee and letting herself finally exhale. It had been 2 years of pain, 2 years of questions, and now, thanks to her son and the dog who had never betrayed them, the truth had finally come to light. Detective Harper had become a constant presence, a guiding force in the family's life. He had helped navigate the legal aftermath, ensuring that all of Dawson's accomplices were brought to justice, and that the department was forced to confront the corruption that had festered for years. One morning, as the sun rose over the city, Harper arrived at the apartment with a manila envelope in hand. Opened the door to find him smiling, a rare sight. "Good news," he said. "The department has agreed to honor Daniel Hayes with a posthumous medal for bravery, and they've named a training program after him, the Hayes Initiative. It's going to focus on ethical policing and K-9 safety protocols, ensuring Rex's loyalty won't be forgotten." Tears welled in his eyes. "Daniel would have been proud," she whispered. "No," Harper corrected gently. "He is proud, and so is Rex." She glanced at the dog, who wagged his tail in response, as if he understood. That afternoon, they drove to the police academy for the ceremony. Reporters lined the streets but kept Noah close, letting him wave shyly to the cameras. Rex walked beside them proudly, his shiny coat glinting in the sunlight. When they arrived, the academy was filled with officers, some new, some veterans, all gathered to witness the dedication of the Hayes Initiative. The ceremony began with speeches, followed by the presentation of Daniel's medal. Accepted it with trembling hands, feeling the weight of 2 years of grief, fear, and determination lift slightly from her shoulders. Noah, perched on her hip, clutched Rex's leash tightly. He had grown in ways could never have imagined, his trauma slowly transforming into resilience. As she looked out over the crowd, spoke softly to Noah. "See, baby, your daddy's name will never be forgotten." Noah's small hand stroked Rex's head. "Dog helped Daddy. We helped Daddy," he said proudly. "Yes, we did," agreed, feeling a lump in her throat. After the ceremony, the family returned home, exhausted but at peace. Harper stayed long enough to brief on the ongoing investigations, but even he admitted the hardest work had been done. Beckett and his accomplices faced long sentences, and the Hayes Initiative promised to prevent such betrayal in the future. That night, tucked Noah into bed and whispered a story, the story of his father's bravery, of Rex's loyalty, and of how even in the darkest times, truth could shine through. As Noah drifted off to sleep, sat quietly beside him, running her fingers through his hair. She reflected on the journey they had taken, the fear, the silence, the revelations, and realized that the bond between mother, son, and dog had grown unbreakable. Rex lay curled at the foot of the bed, his eyes half closed but alert, reached down and stroked his head. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The next morning brought a new sense of normalcy. Noah laughed over breakfast, Rex wagged his tail in greeting, and finally felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. But there was more than normalcy, there was purpose. She began volunteering with the Hayes Initiative, helping train officers to work with K-9 units ethically and safely, using her experiences to guide change. Noah often accompanied her, Rex trotting beside him. People would pause and smile at the trio, mother, son, and dog, whose courage and loyalty had captured the hearts of the nation. Months later, received a letter from the city council, an official recognition of her family's contribution to exposing corruption and restoring trust. The plaque, displayed in the police academy lobby, bore a simple inscription: "In honor of Officer Daniel Hayes, his family, and Rex, for loyalty, courage, and the pursuit of truth." Held the plaque in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knelt to Noah's level. "See, baby, your daddy is honored, and you were part of it too." Noah hugged her tightly, then patted Rex's head. "Dog hero," he said simply. "Yes," whispered smiling, "the biggest hero." The years ahead promised challenges but felt ready to face them. With Noah's growing strength, Rex's unwavering loyalty, and the knowledge that truth and justice had finally prevailed, they could navigate whatever came next. And in quiet moments, when the world seemed overwhelming, when memories of that night threatened to resurface, would look at her son and the dog at his side, and she knew they were safe. Together, they had faced darkness, uncovered lies, and survived. The story of that night, of the toddler who spoke 2 words and the dog whose loyalty never wavered, would echo forever. It was a tale of courage, of love, of justice. It was a reminder that even in the bleakest moments, heroes exist in every form, human and canine alike. As tucked Noah in one last time that night, she whispered, "We did it, baby. Daddy's proud and so am I, and Rex, you're our guardian forever." Rex rested his head on the bed, letting out a soft sigh of contentment. Noah drifted into a peaceful sleep, smiling even in dreams. Sat in the chair beside them, her heart full, her mind finally at rest. The storm had passed, the truth had prevailed. And the legacy of loyalty, courage, and justice would live on, not just in the headlines, but in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the unbelievable courage of a toddler, a dog, and a mother who refused to let lies define them. The sun rose the next morning, warm and golden, casting a new light over the city. Noah and Rex stepped outside together, ready to embrace a world they had fought so hard to protect, and ready to live the life they had earned. For in their story, the 2 words that began it all, bad man, had been transformed into a testament of truth, resilience, and enduring love.